So welcome everyone, my name is Simon Dennis and today I'm going to be talking about modelling memory for wear. So in 1984, Ronald Cotton was convicted for 2 counts of rape and 2 counts of burglary. He was sentenced to life plus 50 years. Cotton was exonerated in 1995 after spending over 10 years in prison when DNA evidence demonstrated his innocence. In addition to 3 false identifications, Cotton also misremembered where he had been at the time of the crime, leading jurors to the conclusion that he was lying. So rather than say where he had been when the crimes were occurring, he'd accidentally recalled where he was the week before. Now, what we'd like to do is have a memory science that's capable of addressing these kinds of issues in a quantitative way. And we can gain some lessons from the laboratory, but if we really want to understand how these issues work in the real world, we need to go out and collect data as people go about their everyday lives. And so that's what we did. So people collected for 2 weeks, and we had accelerometry vectors collected 10 times a second continuously, so about 25 million data points per subject. We had GPS coordinates collected every 10 minutes, so a bit over 4,000 pairs per subject, and then audio segments, so these are short 3-second segments, every 10 minutes also. We also had people rate 8 times a day on the degree to which they're experiencing 11 discrete emotions. You can see those there. So then we asked them to complete a memory test, and each of the trials in the memory test asked them where they were at a specific time. So in this case, it's Thursday morning, 8 AM on August 15th. And you can see there were 4 alternatives. All of the alternatives are places that this person had been before, and they had to choose which one where they'd been at that particular time. They were correct 67% of the time, which of course means they were incorrect about a third of the time, and just lends further credence to the idea that people are not perfect by any stretch of the imagination in making these kinds of decisions. If we look at when they gave the wrong week but the right day, we find that that happened about 19% of the time. And so that's the error that Cotton made. And so in fact, that's well above chance and suggests that that's a likely error that we should be on guard for. Now, to model this, what we did is constructed a memory network, and the nodes in the network were generated by the data that we created. So we had nodes for accelerometry, audio, and GPS clusters. We had nodes for the hours of the day, the days of the week, and the weeks, and we had nodes for the 11 discrete emotions. To connect the nodes, we didn't simply just connect them with some kind of Hebbian rule, because the distribution of the data is such that high frequency things are very highly represented. So they would simply overwhelm the network if we did that. So what we did is we instituted a max degree rule. And so only the m most frequently co-occurring nodes were connected to any given node. So in this case, n is 10. And then to decide upon the strength of those interconnections, we parameterized that as part of the model fit. And we had a separate parameter for each of the different kinds of connections. So, so there'd be a parameter for the audio to emotion links. There'd be another parameter for time to location links and so forth. Now, what we want to do is we want to start with the cues and have activation spread through our network until it gets to the possible responses, and then see how strong those responses are. And the most straightforward way to think about doing that is through a power iteration. So we take the state, in the initial state, as the representation of the cues, and then we keep multiplying that by the weight matrix, updating the state, doing that again and again, and normalizing on each occasion. And so that's the most obvious thing to do. Now, there's a clear problem with doing that, though, and that is that regardless of what input you give the network, you will always end up at the primary eigen vector of the weight matrix. And so a memory system that can only ever give you one possible response is not particularly useful. And so this has been known for a long time. In the 1960s and 70s, Hopfield and Anderson introduced the Hopfield network and the brain state in the box in order to deal with this problem. And so what they did is they brought in nonlinearity. So instead of normalizing, they had the state of the system go to one of the corners of a hypercube. Now, what we'd like to do, though, is be able to have a graded response to each of our activations. And so we prefer not to have them go to those corners. And so instead, what we did is we temporarily updated the weight matrix to dynamically alter the eigenstructure. So we took the pattern representing the Qs, so 3 p.m. Monday and week 35. We take the outer product of that with itself and we add that temporarily to the weight matrix. We then go through the recurrence, find the primary eigenvector, and that's the state that you're seeing here. So each of the nodes here is shaded according to their activation in the primary eigenvector. Now it's a bit hard to see what's going on with all of the links in there. So what I've done is just redrawn the graph, but with only the links that emanate either from a queue or a response, and that helps us to understand what's going on. So to simulate this particular trial, we would have put in the queue 3 p.m. Monday and week 35, and we would have cycled. And what we're interested in is the blue nodes, which are the ones that represent the possible response options here. Now you'll notice that the network thinks that GPS position D and GPS position B, or option B and D, are the most likely, and it's quite uncertain as to which of these two are correct. So in this case, it is the case. It's true that D was correct, but in fact the participant responded B to this trial. Now, if you look at it, you can see why that might have happened. So I'm going to speculate that GPS position D is the participant's home, and I say that because it's connected to Sunday and to Saturday and to relaxed and to happy, whereas GPS position B, I'm going to speculate is the participant's work, and I'm going to say that because it's connected to Monday and to Friday, and also to all of the work time hours. So you can see that usually at 3 p.m. on a Monday, the participant would be at work, but on this particular trial, the participant was at home. And so I think that's why the participants made the error in this case. And you can see that that's also leading to uncertainty in the structure of the network. So we went through and did this for all of our trials from all of the participants, and the model was correct a bit over 51% of the time. And so in this case, chance is 25. So we're clearly capturing something about the nature of the memory process. We have the parameters that we fit in order to maximize our performance there. And so these are the parameters of the link strength between the different modalities. And you can see that there's quite a strong connection between GPS and time. So that might be expected given the task. But there's also even stronger connections from time to emotion and audio. There are strong connections from accelerometry and audio onto emotion as well. So it really is the entire network that's generating the responses. You'll also notice that there's very little activation in the emotion to emotion connections. And that suggests to me that there may be a problem with our emotion representation. We need to look at that. So after a 1 to 3 week retention interval, people were able to identify where they were about 2/3 of the time. So there's an important applied result right there, because it's critical that we understand how reliable people are when they're giving their alibis. The dynamic eigen network with the max degree rule captures about 51% of participant choices. And I think what it does is it exemplifies a system in which generalization is happening at retrieval rather than encoding. And so what we're speculating is that a large portion of generalization happens through the dynamic reconfiguration of the eigenstructure of the memory network as a consequence of short-term plasticity. More generally, I think using experience sampling allows us to make models that are informed by the structure of a individual's environment. And in general, I think we've lacked the ability to really understand how environment impacts memory performance in a detailed way. Thanks for listening.